another segment of the Grassy Knoll. This is April 20th, 2007. And we have with us today Greg from the website Occult of Personality. That link he'll give you later. Before we get to Greg, I just want to mention I got an email from the Uticans. They had their second presentation last night, and they went very well. They're very gratified, and so that was good news. They'll be on next week to talk about what took place. And now, without further ado, Greg, how are you?
Good. Good to talk to you again, Bruce.
All right, and glad to have you here. And folks, also, I did. How long was that, Greg? Was that over an hour?
It was about, like 75 minutes.
Okay. If you go to his website, and what is that now? You want to give that now? Rochester92.vox.com. Did I do well?
That's right. Yeah, the other site is www.occultofpersonality.com, and if I scroll down a bit, it's, I think, listed as podcast 8 there, and it's got your little logo and everything, so you'll easily see it.
What do you mean, my little logo?
Your V is for Vyzygoth, right?
Yeah, there's a story about that. I used to use the mascot for the Philly Phantoms, which is a minor league hockey club in Philadelphia. And, I never branded anything. I just liked it, so we put it on the website for a while. And again, like I said, I never branded anything with it, had no intention of making any money on it. And when finally, after like 3 or 4 years, I get a friendly email from the Phantom saying, this could be copyright infringement. So I don't blame them. I don't, like I said, I wouldn't like it either. But I also knew that I was not, I did not run afoul of them as far as profiting off it, and they knew that too. But that's fair. I thought I might give them a little bit of exposure, but I was wondering when a hockey franchise was going to find out. And who made that logo up was the webmaster, Steve Carroll. Okay, now we are going to talk about the Wizard of Oz, and this gets more interesting as time goes on, Greg. I thought I had it down to what level it was, but there's a level way beyond that. You're going to do some setup for us, so why don't you take it away?
All right, so we're all familiar with the Wizard of Oz story, most of us from the movie that's on television. I think it seems like just about every year. But originally was written as a book by a guy named L. Frank Baum. It was published in 1900. And there's been a number of interpretations of this story, and sort of get into it a little bit. Most of us are probably familiar with a sort of socio-political interpretation of this story that was popularized by a guy named Littlefield in a piece he wrote in 1964, where he basically talks about the Wizard of Oz being a parable on populism. So he had all, kinds of things in there in his paper where the Wicked Witch of the East is representing Eastern industrialists and bankers who control the people, who are represented by the Munchkins. The Scarecrow is the wise and naive farmer. The Tin Woodsman stood for the industrial worker who's being dehumanized. The Lion, of course, all they always talk about is William Jennings Bryan, who was the presidential candidate for populism in 96. And, of course, the Yellow Brick Road is the gold standard, right? And in the story, Dorothy's slippers were actually silver, and I know they were ruby slippers in the movie, but, of course, Littlefield talked about that representing silver being, the populist solution to the country's economic problems, right?
Well, it would be fair to say that those who backed bimetallism were trying to counter any kind of chicanery that might be perpetrated by, I guess you can call them the elites at the time as well. I'm sure John David Rockefeller was thrown in there as being one of them, and they could manipulate one metal. They felt that they had two metals, one would be a hedge against the other one being manipulated. So And I think that's where you get with the populism, which was more for the people, supposedly.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, and I'm not by any sense saying that this interpretation is not valid, but I think, when looking at the author of the original book and sort of looking at it from a standpoint of how likely is it that this is actually what he was saying versus some other interpretations that seem to be a little bit more likely based on who Baum was. And that's where we kind of get into these different ideas about the story. And it was a little bit later point in time, I think sometime in the 80s, we had another scholar, I believe, named, I'll find it as we go along here, but his name was Leach. And basically, he sort of challenged what Littlefield wrote in terms of this populist interpretation of the story by talking about how Baum's politics weren't necessarily populist. He seemed to, at times in the past, be actually anti-William Jennings Bryan. And mainly that Baum and his wife were heavily involved in the Theosophical movement, which, of course, many people were in those days. As sort of a spiritualism, was in a major resurgence at that point in history. So you have a lot of those type of concepts sort of, involved in the story, and I think if you look at it from that perspective, you can see quite a bit more in terms of the symbolical representations of the different aspects of the story.
If I could ask you a little bit about theosophy. Now that is somewhat, I think they may all be tied into a certain extent, but would you consider theosophy some kind of a close relationship with the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn?
Yeah, theosophy was basically started by Madame Blavatsky, and what she did essentially was take the secret teachings of Western occultism and combine those with all of the Eastern mystical teachings of Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, and other philosophies, and sort of synthesize that into, what she considered the true doctrine of spirituality, where it would encompass many different ideas from all over the world.
What would you call Blavatsky's heyday? Post-Civil War, just after?
Yeah, it was definitely post-Civil War, right around the turn of the century.
Would you also say that you could find a parallel between the interest from, I guess you could call them personalities, luminaries, what we would call now Hollywood types, that they were, to me it seems they were as interested in theosophy as you find the present Hollywood types having this rekindling of the Kabbalah. Would that be an accurate portrayal?
Yeah, and I think that is an accurate portrayal. I think this is true throughout history. People who are in the public eye or seem to be in control of, economy or government, business, and things like that, are usually interested in these type of things for whatever reason, whether they are of their own volition or they become, persuaded by others.
Well, Baum, this is a bit of a digression, but Baum went on to write other books. This Dorothy thing was a series, wasn't it?
It was. This Wizard of Oz was the first in the series.
I don't know how deep you go into it, or have gone into it. Is there any kind of necessary conclusion that you know that the series reached? Or
I haven't actually read beyond the first book, or I've seen the movie, but I haven't really investigated much beyond that.
Is that the one where it's like Dorothy versus the Green Dragon?
Right.
Okay. I mean, because that's interesting, too. Looking at this symbology that's in this line of books, the Green Dragon obviously has, quite a bit of meaning. And I also think back to that was the name of the inn where the Freemasons met prior to throwing the Boston Tea Party. But like I said, that's a digression. So this does go on with Baum.
And that building is still there today.
And you would know, wouldn't you?
I would, yeah.
Have you gone by it?
Sure. Yep.
I mean, I don't want to say anything more, but you're in proximity to it, right? I mean, when you do your daily business and stuff.
Oh, not my daily business.
No. Okay. All right. So let me get you back on the track again with Baum. And by the way, he must have been an unusual person. I mean, he was a writer, that's fine, a newspaper writer. That's not necessarily extraordinary. But I just think with what he did and with the targets that he hit, this was not a person of just, a little bit above average intelligence. As far as, what kind of talents this guy had, he was a breed apart, wasn't he?
Yeah, I would agree with you. And in fact, when sort of looking at his work, through that hermetic lens, there are many people who, just assume that he was an initiate. He seems so knowledgeable, and the way he uses the symbols in the story and puts it all together, in addition to sort of creating a story which we can see clearly lends itself to many other interpretations as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sometimes I think by mistake, well, not by mistake, subconsciously, people, when they're writing a work, especially one of fiction, can actually have a couple of themes, if you will, some strands that run through the story that they might not even have intended. And I think that does occur. But certainly, I'm going to give him credit or the blame in whatever case of taking a story and depicting a time in history very well, and then beneath that, we've got somebody who's telling us about the wink and the handshake, don't we?
Oh yeah.
All right, let me ask you too. This is kind of pedestrian, so I'm not going to get deep into it. But I did send this to you yesterday. Would I be wrong? And folks, you can see the cover of the 1900 edition of The Wizard of Oz if you want to do a Wikipedia search on the political interpretations of The Wizard of Oz. Now, I sent you that image. Did you take a look at that at all?
I did, yeah.
I mean, am I crazy for saying there's a possibility here of a little occult symbology? One of the things that I did for one time, and I really should put it back up again, are so many of the politicians of this half century, and especially Harry Truman, given the handshake with the extended index finger. Whatever that means, I don't know, but it's not a mistake. It happens all the time. Now, would you say I was stretching it? And if you think I was, tell me. With the Scarecrow and the Tin Man, with the hand lock they've got on each other?
No, I don't think you're stretching it based on the way we're going to be looking at this story. And to sort of, just to briefly talk about that, when we talk about the handshake or the grip or the many different grips, what we're really getting at is, or what it really represents is this sort of sacred number 10, the Pythagorean decad, right? Because the truth in all things in nature is regenerated through that decad, or 10, and it's preserved in Freemasonry, right, through those grips. And that's because it unites the 10 fingers, 5 on each hand of each person.
When wondering about 9/11, I think it was John Valentini from Australia, and I don't want to indict him necessarily, but when we first started corresponding, after he had heard our interview with Rebecca Carley talking about how you can figure out what's happening by what comes out in entertainment, I think he had mentioned that 9/11 had a certain, together by the way, had a certain occult import, because the numbers also flank, just like what you said, the mystical number 10. And would it be wrong to also assume that the 10 itself is representative in its separate numerals as to both the male and the female? Obviously the 1 being male and the 0 being female. Is that in fact of the deal?
It is, I believe, and, the other thing, of course, is, the 1 and the 0, the 1 being sort of, created, matter or being, and the 0 being the nothingness or the void that it all returns to, or comes from. So these are very ancient concepts. If people are interested in the sort of synchro-mystical connections with 9/11, I would really urge them, if they haven't already, to look at the work of Jake Kotze and his website, The Brave New World Order.
What Kotze could you spell?
Yeah, it's Kotze.
Okay, gotcha.
He's a really, really excellent researcher. And again, it's not what you'd call fact-based research. He's delving into symbols and mystical connections between them.
I'm going to make mention this once more, another element with this cover, and then I'm gone from it. I did have a question about this also. You do see the Tin Man and the Scarecrow pretty much as depicted in, what we saw, for instance, in the movie. But the lion they reserve, being very much the British type of griffin, if you will, or lion. Mm-hmm. And I find that interesting because, the lion to us should be the Burt Lahr character down at the bottom of the cover with the other two. But no, this one's up in the upper right-hand corner. And I just want to real quickly make mention of this, whether or not that British-looking lion was intentional. And you'll find on Wikipedia, which obviously, too, is anti-conspiracy, but it says, supposed involvement in the Bank of England with this bimetallism, Greg. Mm-hmm. It said, free silver supporters often claim that there was involvement by the British in the passage of the Coinage Act of 1873. Most often they claimed it was Englishman Ernest Sedd who came to the United States to secure passage of the measure through means of bribe. None of this is true. Sedd was, in fact, a supporter of bimetallism, and records show that he did not travel to the U.S. during the aforementioned period. Supposed quotes from him have all been faked. Well, I might be fine attributing it to Sedd, but, don't tell me that the Bank of England could have possibly been involved with it. Hence, also, the use of that particular form of the lion. One last thing also, by the way, so people can understand the whole connection with Britain. You know how everybody now is like saying, oh, it's the Jews, it's the Jews, it's the Jews. Well, here's an article, real short, and I'll read one quote from the 1945 New York Times. I believe it was October. No, it's April. April of 1946. Sorry to confuse you. The head of the article says, policy of U.S. held swayed by the British. And here's the quote from Dean Howard Lassord of the Boston University. And it said, our State Department seems to have no mind of its own when it deals with the British on matters of world policy, and even our president backs down at the suggestion of the Prime Minister of England. So, where they always fix it to the Jews, here you've got a situation where the United States is concerned about Britain's power over the U.S., and that's where I'll leave it. So,
yeah, I think if people are interested in that type of stuff, that you need to look into the whole concept of British Israel, and the World British Israel Federation, and what Jordan Maxwell calls British Israel Freemasonry.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. No doubt about it. Britain obviously was, and let's face it, Rothschilds run the show, and they have used militaries and they have used governments in time gone by, but they certainly got the best they could out of the British government and also its military in destabilizing the Middle East. And of course, to do what? To create this symbolic Masonic state of Israel, which obviously bears the Star of David, which has got nothing to do with David, and goes back to Mystery Babylon religion. So this thing was the Rothschild stamp on what was going to happen. And we've seen it to this day, except they've switched out the British government and military for the U.S. government and military. So you're right about that whole connection. So
it's a really fascinating thing, and historically, and I mean, ancient history before the modern times and all of their claims. So I'll let people make up their own minds about that.
Mm-hmm. I just want to know whether or not today we're going to wind up talking a little bit about Dallas. Did you have any intention to do that?
Yeah, I think so. Why don't we get into a little bit more of the Oz thing?
Oh, absolutely. I don't want to
direction.
Right. I don't want to lose that. That's all. Or else I would just save it for the next time you're on. So by all means, whatever happens. But that's also very interesting. I mean, actually, there's nothing not interesting about this whole thing. So.
Yeah, the more you look at it, really, the more you can find. So it's just like anything. It's like how deep down do you want to dive?
But I mean, I said stuff on your show I've not said on this one, and I think I will on May 1st to commemorate when all of us became targets, and that's obviously May 1st, 1776. That really was the beginning of the end for us, even before we began, a couple of months later. But you're right. I mean, now you start to realize just how replete and complicated, this whole thing is. I mean, it's very much labyrinthine, and it's done that for a purpose.
Yeah, and if you want to look at, May 1st or May Day, you have to look also at the Mayflower.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
They're all tied together.
Mm-hmm. All right, now we went, like I said, I kind of split away. You mentioned Baum. Also, what's interesting, too, is what Baum was into was also shared on the other side of the pond also, and I think one of the prime literary motivators behind what went on with theosophic involvement and involvement in the Golden Dawn was William Butler Yeats, who was very, very arcane and symbolic in his work. So, at any rate, so it seems like that was very much embraced by the literati at the time, and also the what you would consider the Hollywood types and the show types.
Right. Yeah, and I think once we get into it, you'll be a lot more clear why that is. So to kind of start with this whole idea of Oz, right? The Wizard of Oz. What is Oz? What does it stand for? Now, of course, in this whole populist bimetallism interpretation, Oz is the abbreviation for ounce when you're talking about precious metals, right? And the Wizard of Oz can manipulate the metals and their value. But if we look a little bit beyond that, from the theosophical interpretation, we see that Oz is also something else. When they talk about measurements in the Bible, they use this term cubit, the royal cubit. So this unit of measurement, the cubit, apparently had a radius that was called Oz. So this is used in the building of all the ancient megaliths, supposedly that of the Temple of Solomon as well. So that's another sort of source for this word Oz. And yet a third interpretation that I have from a fairly reliable source is that, and this goes back to the whole story of Sabbatai V and Sabbatanism in the ancient times. Basically, at sort of the end of his role there, he was forced to convert to Islam by the Caliph, who was in charge of, I think, the Ottoman Empire at the time. And supposedly, the location where he resided after that took place was also known as Oz. So you have a lot of different connections here with this word Oz, very occult type of things. So that's sort of like the doorway, and then we have another sort of very, what I would call, synchromistic connection with this whole idea of the Wizard of Oz, sort of as an entity. And we've all, those of us who've seen the movie, can sort of picture at the end of the film what the Wizard of Oz looked like, that, huge green face, right? And this has been synchromistically connected to a vision that was had by Aleister Crowley in Egypt. It was a being he named or called Aiwass, right? And the picture that he drew of Aiwass looks strikingly similar to the pictured Wizard of Oz from the movie. So there's no, definite connection, nothing certainly provable, but, it is what we would call this sort of synchronistic connection, because it is rather notable, and the fact that, Theosophy and Crowley and this whole occult resurgence of, the turn of the century there was very closely connected. All of these people were in touch with each other, with their correspondence and their meetings and whatnot. So it sort of goes from there. I guess we can sort of look at a little bit of this idea of the Emerald City, right? And before we kind of get into the more realistic interpretation of it, another way to look at it, of course, is, in relation to the sacred emerald tablets of Hermes Trismegistus. And these are the, sacred tablets where the arcane knowledge of the ancient world was recorded before the deluge that swept the planet.
One question, if I could, it just came to me, if you don't mind.
Mm-hmm. Do
you think Baum, in a sense, was one pushing or advocating theosophy, or was this something you kind of do with a wink to your brothers and sisters, in the movement?
Well, it's hard to say. I would guess that, my guess would be that it was more of the latter, because theosophy and these type of what used to be called, ancient mystery schools were not really something that you could force people into. It's more the type of thing they wanted people to come to on their own. Having somebody unwilling or, forced into it typically is not going to result in the outcome that either you or they are looking for, I would imagine.
It does remind me, though, of movies where, when you look back, you realize exactly what they were telling you, although perhaps at the time when you watched it, you weren't scratching down to get that level. Obviously, it makes for a good storyline no matter what. So if you don't get it, it's still interesting. If you do get it, it's even more revealing.
It certainly is, yeah.
And also one other thing, I'm going to ask you some questions real quick from some listeners. And folks, I was late with the EIM, but MSN is up. It's Vyzygoth. If you want to email me, go to Vyzygoth@hotmail.com. I also sent something to you because this always struck me also about Wizard of Oz, and Harry pointed this out to me, and that is, the Grange is a big thing, obviously, in the Midwest, always has been. We think of it as a gathering of farmers, and I'm sure that's what it is too, but then they go off on their little quasi-Masonic thing also, and are full of symbology and degrees and everything else, and I've always somewhat have seen that in the Wizard of Oz, given where it, obviously it took place. So, I just want to throw that out. There's another thing, too. I don't know if you can address this, but somebody wants to know whether or not you think that artist, Denslow, who obviously did the cover of Baum's book, was in on it.
It's hard to say, but, judging from the picture I've seen, it would certainly seem that he was.
Also, there are a number of, I think there are 4 other works of Denslow that if you go to Wikipedia, you can see that and you can blow them up and take a look. Very interesting. Anyway, that's it. Let me ask you this. Did you send somebody an online book, R.E. Wilson? Does that ring a bell?
I posted a free download of
okay.
a Robert Anton Wilson book that was called The Sex Magicians.
Okay. All right, well, someone's thanking you for doing that.
You're welcome.
Okay, and one other thing is, and I think you and I both have seen this, Freeman did an interview with a Corliss, is that right? Corey Corliss with regard to Hollywood/Masonic connections, looking at Nicole Smith, Nicole Smith, Britney Spears, and Madonna, and all that.
Mm-hmm.
Have you gone over that?
Yeah, I have.
Okay.
I've been actually speaking to my friend Ben Fairhall about this quite a bit. He has a site called Battling the Behemoth. People can find the link to it on my site.
Okay.
And he has a multi-part series which addresses the same topic, where you have this sort of intersection of Madonna and Britney and all sorts of bizarre behavior and coincidences.
Okay, well, anyway, thanks for that, listener, and off we are, down the yellow brick road again.
Alrighty. Well, let's, you brought up the Grange, so I think
okay.
In relation to sort of this idea of the Emerald City, we talked about the Emerald Tablets, but let's talk about the modern Emerald City that exists right now, which we know is Dallas, Texas, right? Because right now Dallas has a huge, mirrored skyscraper with, neon green lights. So it's often referred to now as the Emerald City. And of course, Dallas has quite a history.
Oh yeah, and we're both agreed that James Shelby Downard in King Kill 33 did a lot of good work on that, pulling out Dallas's past. Once again, you have the Lone Star State, and you got to wonder too, if Dallas had a certain import, that would indicate that would have to be the place where they would kill the king, meaning Kennedy. So you got to wonder, and also, of course, of its proximity to the 33rd degree latitude.
Sure. Mm-hmm. And then, what was behind that decision, of course, to turn it into the quote-unquote Emerald City, after that.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, it's certainly interesting synchromistic questions that we can ask about this. And before we get into it even further, I just want to mention the link on my site, and some of the things we've been sort of getting into about theosophy and these symbols and representations are from a researcher called Synchronous 23. And she does some really amazing work, and I think anybody who takes a look at the post that she put together called The Wizard of I Was, Part 1, that I've linked up there, will see that you're basically going totally down the rabbit hole, and when you come out the other side, you're not going to be able to look at this book or movie the same way again.
And I watched that movie in preparation, watched it twice for what we are doing today, and I have to say, really, this is a case probably, and it may be more than just once in a while, where the symbology in the book is so much greater than what they did with the movie. It's almost as if those who really did make the movie weren't thinking about anything else but, which is kind of unusual since we say so much comes out of Hollywood, that they would do something with it. But, really, with the exception of the Emerald City, and when they first knock on the door, and it's full of geometric shapes, we'll just say that, I couldn't find anything else in there that, we were getting the wink and the laugh behind the backhand. So I think the book probably is just so much more replete with the symbolism.
Yeah, probably so. But there certainly is enough there that we can take a look at it and do some work on it. Starting with some of the major symbols, again from the movie, another of which is this yellow brick road. The bimetallism and populist interpretation, they talk about that being actual, reference to gold being, precious metal and the basis for currency. But in Eastern mystical teachings, you have this concept of the road to devotion or the road to enlightenment, and you've probably heard it referred to as the Golden Road to unlimited devotion. I think actually the Grateful Dead put a song by that name on their first album. Speaking of alchemical connections. So that's sort of this idea of the Golden Road, right? And it takes Dorothy from Munchkinville, right, which is the realm of the people in the land of Oz, because they are, in a sense, shrunken. They are disempowered, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it leads her to, basically the fortress of the wizard, the threshold to the ancient mysteries to be revealed. So it's totally a story of that, process, that path to enlightenment, as, many people call it.
Also, by the way, I just want to throw this in before we get too far from it. Do you remember the original name of the Grateful Dead?
I believe it was the Warlocks.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I know Jerry Garcia also played in a band prior to that called the Zodiacs.
It just keeps getting better.
Yeah, and I can go, right off the rails into that, talking about Robert Hunter and, all of their connections with the Dark Star and alchemy and the whole LSD distribution idea. That whole thing is really, really rife with all kinds of ideas.
Let me ask you something. Were ancient alchemists thought to be able to transmutate objects or other minerals into precious metals?
Yes.
Okay.
And again, you'll often hear times that this was sort of an allegorical thing where they were really just transmuting themselves. But I think the research shows that something was going on, whether or not it was real or trickery, and ultimately the real alchemical process is internal and has nothing to do with metal. But there is plenty of evidence that they either were able to transmute or were able to convince people that they could.
And the reason I bring it up, and this is something that I see, I don't think I've read this is actually an original thought I had. Or maybe it's not, you can't tell anymore, but this bit about transmuting, it was almost like a reversed transmuting in the Wizard of Oz, in the sense that you've got the silver slippers on the on the Yellow Brick Road, rather, silver and metal, heading their way to the Emerald City, where you get them converted into fiat currency.
Mm-hmm.
So, I thought there was a line there, too, where you take both metals and you turn them into worthless paper. So, and the color green, obviously.
Yeah, and this is interesting, too, because we can always connect money directly to these ideas, of course, because of, coins, right? You had golden coins, which represented the sun, silver coins, which represented the moon, bronze coins, which represented the earth.
Yep. It's a coincidence, Greg. It's a coincidence. We've got another comment for you real quick. It said, the hidden symbology, it's a huge subliminal seduction, sex magic type images. It's really about profaning the sacred. They feed it to us in a way that we ingest and digest it all without being consciously aware of it. They really get off on this because they have killed two birds with one stone. That would be putting one over on us, the uninitiated, and getting their point across also. So.
Yeah, in many ways, that seems to be true.
Mm-hmm. So that was just a comment. So, where were we?
Okay, so beyond the Yellow Brick Road, let's talk a little bit about the character of Dorothy, right? She's the main protagonist of the story, and she really relates well, in terms of mythological figures to the idea of Persephone, taking this underworld journey. It begins as she's sucked through a vortex, basically. Now, in the movie, and I think in the book, they call it a cyclone, right?
Right.
And as Synchronous 23 has pointed out very pointedly, they don't have cyclones in the Midwest. They have tornadoes.
Yeah.
So what's the deal with calling it a cyclone?
Yeah, good point. Because cyclones, aren't they supposed to go the opposite way?
Well, that's a good question. I'm not sure. But she points out that, the connection to this whole idea of the vortex which essentially relates to this concept of the Stargate.
Yeah, I would say, if people are wondering what we're talking about, the website is, it's synchronos23.vox.com. You would spell that SYNKRONOS, like Sin and Chronos, 23.vox.com, and you can hit it from there. Okay, so if people are wondering where it's coming from, that's it. So
yeah, and there's also a link from my site as well.
Okay. I did give that a read, and I have to admit, it kind of convinces me of Baum's, primary intent, which you had alluded to me once in a while. I was like, oh, okay, but when I saw this, obviously, the individual did their homework.
Oh, yeah.
And presents a case for this.
Yeah, she's very well versed in ancient mythology and the occult and these connections. And I have actually an interview with her. I think it's podcast 5.
Okay.
And people want to listen more to her work, and it's really quite interesting.
All right, now with Dorothy.
So yes, she goes through this vortex, and essentially ends up in the land of Oz. She's got this dog named Toto with her, right, which has been connected to Sirius or Anubis. Is basically her protector in the underworld, right? And you notice that ultimately at the very end of the movie, it is Toto who essentially reveals the wizard for who he is.
Right. And also it's interesting that it's a classic black animal, in this case a dog, which has, another like Mephistophelian symbolism as well. Mm-hmm. The familiar spirit, in other words. You can find that also in Marlowe. Mm-hmm.
I was just going to mention that. Perfect point.
Okay. Oh, gee, thanks. But, that's in Dr. Faust, written by Marlowe, where and also, I think it comes to the case where what happened was when the character tried to double-cross Satan, two things happened. One, they found the individual dead in his room with his neck twisted completely around, which is supposedly a satanic assassination. And guess who disappeared but the black dog? So, and here we have the black dog. It's almost like a reverse type of familiar spirit. You don't see Toto as being something necessarily evil, obviously, but you do have that relationship which kind of runs through a lot of occultism.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. From right off the bat with this movie, it really gets going. You notice how after she gets sucked through the vortex, essentially the home or house that she's in is landed on top of one of the wicked witches, right? Essentially, representing the death of her innocence, right? Her innocence has died. She's been introduced into this bizarre fantasy world, and she has to go on this quest for enlightenment to find the secret that will return her home or happiness or whatever it is she's seeking. But, and from there, we look at this idea of the good witch, right, which relates to this concept which you'll find in a lot of theosophy and other occult teachings of the holy guardian angel. Mm-hmm. This spiritual being that is your protector and your guidance, and someone that occultists will occasionally seek by performing certain rites and rituals. So this is a really fascinating concept to me too, as well, when you look at this idea of the good witch and how she's symbolized with light and this sort of white aura around her.
Yeah, and her power is not one of aggression but protection. Mm-hmm. So she doesn't have to tussle with any of the wicked witches. Obviously, she's not at all intimidated. But her way of doing it, and this is Christianity in itself also, is not through aggression but through protection of the individual.
Right. And one of the things you'll notice too is sort of throughout the story, Dorothy gets guided by these forces that are protecting her, right, from the silver slippers, which as long as she's wearing them, she can't really be harmed. But when she reaches the Emerald City to confront the wizard, she learns that she has to sort of go the rest of the way on her own, right? Her guides can only bring her so far, right? And this is that idea where, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink.
Right.
It's that same type of concept where it's up to the individual to make that leap to enlightenment or, illumination or whatever they want to call it.
Well, once again, you've been given the information, you've been given the tools, but that doesn't necessarily mean anybody's going to be successful. You're right. In the end, you have to apply them and be consistent and vigilant, and that's the only way it can happen.
Right. Now, the other really huge symbol I want to get to before time gets too short here is this whole idea of the rainbow, right?
Uh-huh.
In the movie, too, especially because of that song, I think it was called Over the Rainbow or whatever, but this idea of the rainbow is a very interesting concept because it gets into so many different ideas. Originally, if you look at the whole story of the deluge and Noah, the rainbow was a symbol of God's sort of pact with man not to continue to ravage the earth with the floods.
Right.
And it was seen as such by Noah. And if we think about it, also, the rainbow is really, in some respects, another sort of aspect of this idea of the royal arch of heaven. So you have that as well. And we know that the rainbow is made up of 7 colors, right? And 7 is always been held to be the number of religion, right? Because man has been controlled by 7 celestial spirits. The Elohim were supposedly 7 in number, often known as archangels that control the 7 planets. So this idea of the rainbow and 7 and the royal arch and sort of going over the rainbow, it matches in with all of this stuff just perfectly. So, I think, when you get into it, there's just no question in my mind whatsoever that Baum was writing this story, based on a lot of, what we would call initiatory knowledge or, things he had learned through his studies of theosophy. I think anybody who reads, Isis Unveiled or The Secret Doctrine, you'll see how it applies. Not easy reading necessarily, but the information is all there.
I don't know if you've ever gone into this. I'll tell you that there are 2 things that struck me strange, and one very disturbingly when I was young. And I believe the Wizard of Oz used to come back to TV every Thanksgiving or so. I think that's what I remember that correctly. So it was an annual event for quite some time. But until I was older, what I really didn't like and disturbed me about the Wizard of Oz were the flying monkeys. I mean, I was like, that is really, to this day to me, a very evil-looking creature. Yeah. Was that the way it was that Baum depicted those who assisted the evil witch, or was that a construct of movie making?
I think it was sort of similar in the book. I'd have to go back and check, to be honest with you. I can't recall, but
well, in one of Denzelow's covers or illustrations, she's sitting in a hay truck or something like that with a dog behind her, and there looks like what could be considered a formation of geese, not in a V, but they're descending down. But when you take a closer look, these creatures, whatever they are pretty much, you could tell that they're more, if you will, corporeal and more mass than geese. So, in a sense, that might be exactly, the connection that they did in the movie accurately portray those who served the witch. The other thing also I thought was a little strange, and I don't know if you want to touch upon it now, like we only got about 8 minutes or so. What was, they fall asleep in the field. It's almost like some kind of like ritual death, and is this where we're going? A ritual death and resurrection when they come back up.
Well, yeah, that's a good way to look at it, too. But, it's interesting to note they fall asleep in the poppy fields. Opium is clearly a, narcotic that is going to distract you from your quest, whatever it is. I think you're right. They fall asleep there. We could interpret that, obviously as sort of most of humanity in many ways is asleep. But they wake up and continue their quest, as you said, sort of resurrected or reborn. Mm-hmm. So absolutely. And I think, you can connect this with all kinds of things. Just for example, if you take a look at the Fool card in the Rider-Waite Tarot deck, the Fool is wearing a tunic with opium poppies on it.
Okay. Also, we had talked yesterday with somebody about Kerouac. And one of the things we said, not that you had to listen to it, but did you get a chance to catch that?
I caught the first half, yeah.
Okay. But we were talking also that all through literature there is this motif of the questor, one who quests, the Holy Grail, the whole 9 yards, and you can see it also with Kerouac and On the Road. But here again, we had that same motif running through this as well. There is a quest where if the goal is achieved, the individuals, whatever, will be better human beings for it. It'll be edifying, if you will.
Right. Yeah, and this is the ancient story that the myths contain as well, trying to sort of instruct humanity that, we can't just sit around and expect to better ourselves or attain this incredible spiritual awareness. We have to go on the quest and seek it, or else you won't ever, come to it.
Mm-hmm. We also had an email from someone who talks about 7, and this is true. She cites Bollinger saying 7 is the number of perfection, and she would also embrace it in a Christian sense, and also, obviously, then the 6 becomes that of the evil entity.
Really? Well, that's interesting. Now, because, when we think about these things, all right, say, if you talk about the 7, right, you think of the spirit, mind, and the soul, which are 3, descend into the world, which is 4, adds up to 7, the mystic nature of man. And this is symbolized by a cube, which has 6 surfaces and a mysterious 7th point within. Right? And that's, goes back to this whole idea of the Philosopher's Stone, or the Great Cube of Masonry, or the Kaaba. All of these type of things you can relate it back to.
And Freeman makes a good point, too, about that image being used as another occult corporate logo. Because you can play some games also with, turning that cube to reflect certain other things. And like you just said, it could also be akin to, what we would call the Star of David, the triangle and such.
Or the Seal of Solomon.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, and that's where, that phrase, as above, so below,
yes,
is symbolized. The blade and the chalice, as it's referred to in medieval lore.
We're going to have to wrap it up very shortly, so with that heads up, is there something else you want to table as far as the imagery that we're talking about from The Wizard of Oz?
I think, the only other thing I think to look at, it was just one other interesting thing, which is sort of the way they sort of depart in that great red balloon.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Which is perfect. It's just symbolizing sort of a solar disk or the sun, and it's ascending, right? It's going up. Mm-hmm. Of course, symbolizing sort of that ascension,
right,
of knowledge or up the tree of life. It's just it really is overpowering once you sort of become aware of how these things fit together. And The Wizard of Oz is one of those works where once you see it that way, you can't really unsee it.
Oh, exactly. Exactly. In fact, we also have another comment to that effect. The statement is, kiss your childhood imagery and benefit that fantasy can bring us goodbye. And the initiated love that too. Okay. And so,
And I think it's important, these stories, regardless of, whether or not we derive some sort of childhood, memories of, fond memories from them, it's still a useful story, probably more so now, knowing what it, represented to the person that wrote it originally, because regardless of, whether you like the symbolism or not, the truths that are contained in it are really, it's not anything good or bad, it just is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what I'm thinking about too, and then we got to get out of here. And I'm trying to remember it, and I can't. But when I was thinking about very, very allegorical and heavy symbology, almost to the point where you think it's wasted, and I want to come up with it. I'm not going to do it. I'll get 8 emails after this, and that's fine. But T.S. Eliot's poem, the famous one, where he also goes on the quest.
This one.
So yeah. At any rate, if anybody can get a hold of that, you ought to read that, because that is something else. Just reminds me of this just heavily laden symbology in a work. I don't think anybody but he could pull that off. And like we said yesterday about On the Road, I don't think anybody has to rewrite that poem either. That stands for all time.
Absolutely. That's a timeless classic.
All right. Well, Greg, our time is up. And we'll go on more about this. And one thing I'd like to throw out too, with this whole bit about Dallas, it's interesting if it is the Emerald City, and if it was picked for the place where they would kill the king. Isn't it interesting that the person who would kill the supposed assassin of JFK would be Ruby? Would be Ruby. So, all right, we got a scat, folks. Check out Greg's website. You can hit it for mine, and also you can hit Synchronos. 23.box.com from him. Greg, thanks for being with us. We'll probably see you in a couple of weeks. All right with you?
Great. Thanks, Viz. I look forward to it.
No problem. And remember, spring is coming.
It's here today. It's here today.
Bye-bye.